Hi, so I'm Holly, and I'm the president of Harvard University Effective Altruism Student Group. And together with Harvard College Effective Altruism, we are Effective Altruism at Harvard. We're the primary sponsors of this debate, and we have a whole host of other sponsors, which I'd like to tell you about. We're also sponsored by the Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics here at Harvard, the Harvard Vegan Society, the Harvard Law School Student Animal Legal Defense Fund, and the Good Food Institute. So I already said who I am with our sponsors. So let me introduce our debaters. So from Harvard College, we have Dhruva Bhat. Also present is the debate team, who is also sponsored Harvard debate team, who is a senior studying economics and originally from Chennai, India. And Danny DuBois is a junior in social studies and originally from Harrison, New York. And they're both very active in the debate union, which is also apparently very supportive of them. And our debaters against the motion, which I should state is eating meat is neither ethical nor healthy, are Bruce Friedrich, who's the executive director of the Good Food Institute, which focuses on disputing animal agriculture by promoting plant-based and cultured meat alternatives. So a little bit of Bruce's history is that he graduated from Georgetown Law and also holds a degree from Johns Hopkins and the London School of Economics in political science. And he's held many leadership roles in nonprofit organizations against animal agriculture around the world. John Mackey is the co-founder and CEO of Whole Foods. And I'm sure you guys know how successful Whole Foods is. I have many things I could say. So what I think is most interesting is that he's devoted his career to helping shoppers satisfy their lifestyle needs with natural and organic foods, but he's also focused on more conscious ways of doing business and recognized as one of Fortune's World's 50 Greatest Leaders and Entrepreneur of the Year overall winner by Ernst & Young. So I think we're in for a very spirited debate, and let's wish both of our sides the best of luck right now, and get started. So we're going to start with John.
People hear me? Kind of. It's all spoken. It does go up. I'm sorry, you charge Whole Foods if I broke this. So I'm very excited about this debate, and I'm very gratified to find that one of our opponents is a vegetarian. So I'm giving him like major points for taking the other side. And I told him I hope to be able to give him good arguments he can use with his friends after the debate. So, let's get cracking because I don't have that much time. And they're saying I only got 10 minutes here. Is that right? Who's the timekeeper?
I think you got 15.
15, okay, that's good. All right. Right, first thing you got to know. You wouldn't know it looking around this room, but America is fat. We are now 36% obese. 36% of the adult population is obese. That's up from 15% about 40 years ago. And it's not just a U.S. problem. As we export our eating patterns across the world, obesity is becoming a worldwide epidemic. Just look at the increases in the last 28 years in country after country. Why? Why are we getting fat? We're programmed for it. Almost throughout our entire history of the evolutionary past, we couldn't get enough calories. We were just trying not to starve to death. So we've evolved to actually crave calorie-dense foods. When you can get a calorie-dense food, sugar, refined carbohydrates, cheese, ice cream, meat, these foods, we just like them. But we just couldn't get very much when we were evolving. But now we're rich, and we can eat them 3 times a day, and that's what we do. And our health really pays a heavy price for it. So one of the things most people aren't aware, we're aware of people being addicted to tobacco, addicted to alcohol or opiates, but very few people are aware of how addicted they are to food. In fact, food addictions are kind of normal in our society. And you don't know you have food addictions until you try to change your diet. Then you'll discover it ain't so easy. Here's what 500 calories looks like, and this makes my point about calorie-dense food. So the most calorie-dense food you could eat is vegetable oil. A tablespoon of vegetable oil is 120 calories. So if you were to get 500 calories of vegetable oil, you're only getting like 4 tablespoons of oil in your stomach, which some people do when they go to an Italian restaurant and they dip their bread in olive oil. They don't know it. They blame it on the carbs, but they put down 500 calories of olive oil before they've even gotten their entree. Here you can see cheese is 70% fat, 70 to 80% fat, very calorie dense. Then you got meat. And then you can see you can almost fill up your stomach on 500 calories if you're just eating starch-based foods like beans and brown rice, starchy vegetables like butternut squash. And then if you're eating fruits and veggies, I mean, vegetables only have 90 calories per pound. Oil has 4,000 calories per pound. So you can eat all the fruits and vegetables that you want to eat, and you fill up your stomach. And if that's all you ate, you'd actually starve to death. You couldn't get enough calories if you only ate fruits and vegetables. Well, look, as we've gotten wealthier, our consumption of meat has steadily risen. It's gone up 70% since 1940. It's declined, I'm happy to say, a little bit over the last decade or so as people's consciousness, particularly millennials, are embracing more plant-based diets. That's beginning to have an effect. So meat consumption is actually beginning to decline, really, for the first time in our history. Unfortunately, while it might be declining a little bit in the United States, it's absolutely exploding around the rest of the world. As the rest of the world becomes wealthier, as they can indulge their own craving for calorie-dense foods, one of the first foods they want to get more of, they want to eat more animal foods. So every one of these indicators is up. And Bruce is going to get into some of the ethics and some of the environmental consequences of eating this much animal food and what it's doing to our planet. It's terrible. Cheese. Yes, a very addicting food. And look, I mean, back in 1915, the average American consumption of cheese was about 3 pounds per capita per year. Now we're up to 33.5 pounds of cheese. I don't eat any, so somebody out there is eating like 67 pounds of cheese a year. One of the challenges I'm going to put to our opponents is that all major studies, every major study that's ever been done, shows an increase in all-cause death and mortality from eating heavy animal foods diets. There are no exceptions to this. There are no studies that have ever been made of plant food-centered diets that show similar effects. Red meat is, of course, one of the worst of the villains, and we have the Harvard School of Public Health followed 120,000 people for 22 to 28 years, and for every serving of red meat, which is about 2 to 3 ounces, your increase of dying from all-cause mortality goes up about 13%. So if you're putting down like a 16-ounce steak a day, you're talking about like a 65 to 70% increase in the risk of death from all-cause mortality. In 2015, the World Health Organization came out with a very important proclamation. They officially classified processed red meats, processed meats like salami, bologna, prosciutto, bacon, as a class 1 carcinogen. Right up there with tobacco and asbestos as a cause and promoter of cancer. So even if you don't give up all kinds of meats, give up the processed meats. You're just really increasing the risk of cancer down the road. So this is interesting. So the low carbohydrate protein diet, research followed 43,000 Swedish women, 30 to 49 years of age, and then they rated their score based on how low carb their diet was and how much animal foods they were eating. And their conclusion was that low carbohydrate, high protein animal diets are associated with a significant increase in cardiovascular disease. Here you can see it. The more animal foods they eat, the higher their risk for cardiovascular disease. Here's another study. 6,000 people in the 50 to 65 range were followed for 18 years. Now the statistics are almost, if you're good in statistics, it's kind of mind-blowing. There's a 4x, or 400% increased risk of cancer deaths compared to those who eat lower animal protein intake. But there's a 73% increased risk of developing diabetes in the higher animal protein group, and a 23x increased risk if you're eating moderate animal protein consumption compared to lower animal protein. 75% increase in overall mortality over that 18-year period. Here you can see this cancer risk shown graphically. The more animal protein you eat, the higher risk of cancer. Now we have over 1,000 studies that, doing a meta-analysis, shows that eating red meat and processed meat causes an increased risk of colon cancer. Meanwhile, a plant-based diet consisting primarily of whole grains, fruits and vegetables and beans decreases the risk of colon cancer. As a result, the World Cancer Research Fund and American Institute for Cancer Research have recommended officially eating a plant-based diet. Let's take a look at breast cancer. This one's really scary. So 87 countries participated with high-quality data in the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And animal foods consumptions was correlated with 12 different types of cancer with a lag period of about 15 to 25 years. So it's not like an instant killer, but over time, it takes a while. When you get cancer, it takes about 10 years or so before it even shows up, before you can even get a read on it. So and interestingly enough, most of these 87 countries were not eating industrialized animal foods, which are, of course, the worst, but they were eating a lot of pasture-raised and non-feedlot animals. Here you can see that breast cancer, the more calories they were getting from animal foods, the higher the incidence of breast cancer with a 15 to 25 year lag period. Let's talk about what's so good about plant-based diets. So a plant-based diet is, we're going to argue, or I'm going to argue that it's somewhere between 0% animal foods and about 10% animal foods. The average American eats about 34% of their calories from animal foods. So if you were to get it down to 10% or less, I would say that's primarily eating a plant-based diet. One of the myths out there is that animal foods are more dense in nutrients. I mean, where do you get your protein? Where do you get your calcium? It's like, hey dude, where do you get your fiber? Where do you get your micronutrients? So when we talking about vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients, you're going to see that, look at these microdensity per calorie. So at the very bottom, vegetable oils and refined sugars, which I will argue are foods nobody should eat. Those foods are just terrible for you. They have no micronutrient density at all. They're like zero. Then you got refined grains, like white flour. Then you got cheese and full-fat dairy, then red meat. So the animal foods are better than the processed carbs. And one of the tricks that's often played by people who want to promote low-carb diets, paleo diets, things like that, is they want to compare eating animal foods to eating sugar or eating refined grains. And guess what? Meat looks pretty good when you stack it up against those competitors. But when you try to stack it up against raw vegetables and fruits and whole grains and beans, you can see which ones have the highest density of micronutrients per calorie. It's not even close. Plant foods wipe the arena. One of the myths also is that human beings have basically evolved eating primarily whole starch foods. Things like rice, corn, wheat, rye, barley, sweet potatoes, legumes, beans of all kinds. They have been the major calorie source. In fact, I challenge you to name one major civilization that's ever happened on this planet that didn't base their diet primarily around whole plant-based starches. That's what's fed the world for thousands and thousands of years. How many of you have heard of the blue zones? It's Harvard, of course you've heard of blue zones. 5 blue zones have been identified. These are the places in the world that have the highest longevity, the most centenarians per capita, the overall highest lifespans. So you've got Nicoya, Costa Rica, you've got Okinawa, Japan, you've got Tikara, Greece, Sardinia, Italy, and you've also got in the United States, Loma Linda, California, where the Seventh-day Adventists hang out. What do these people eat? They eat plant-based diets. They eat no processed foods, or almost no processed foods, and they eat very little animal foods. The Okinawan diet, in fact, the elders, 70% of their diet is just sweet potatoes. Just sweet potatoes. And then they're 96% plant-based, eat about 4% of their calories from animal foods. Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, California, another blue zone area. They've been a couple of very important health studies have been done about these guys. First of all, the Seventh-day Adventists, they're such a good cohort to study because they don't drink, they don't smoke, they have religious faith, they have a strong sense of family and community, and so the big differentiator is what do they eat. So they have some vegans, they have some pescatarians, they have some are vegetarians, they have some that are omnivores. And the studies show that the fattest ones are the ones who eat the most animal foods, the omnivores do. The thinnest, the BMI, are the vegans. Also, the vegan Adventists who ate nuts and seeds, exercised and didn't smoke, they are the longest lived cohort that we've ever discovered on the planet Earth. The healthiest place in the world, right now that we know about, is in Loma Linda, California, amongst the vegan Adventists. The males, on average, live 14 years longer than the average American, Caucasian American females, about 10 years longer. Look at the lower risk of cancer, heart disease, diabetes. It's off the charts. Dean Ornish. Here's one of the most interesting things. Dean Ornish proved that you can prevent and reverse heart disease, and nobody cares. They'd rather give stents and drugs and do bypass surgeries. Health industry makes a lot of money doing that, but there's no need. You can reverse heart disease and prevent it by simply eating a plant-based whole foods diet. In Ornish's case, mostly starches and fairly low in fat. His results were incredible. You could see what happens to the cholesterol and all the basic biometrics rapidly fall when people go on this diet. That was now been supported by the incredible work that Caldwell Esselstyn has done. So he had 198 patients that had cardiovascular disease. These were very advanced people who'd had heart attacks, and they were like going to die. And he put them on this very strict whole foods, plant-based diet, no oil, no refined carbohydrates, low fat. And 89% of his patients that adhered to his program, they only had one cardiac event in the time they were tracked. Whereas the 11% who didn't follow his program and reverted back to more of a standard American diet, 62% had a cardiac event. So, I'll challenge my debate partners with this, debate opponents. Where are the studies and who are the doctors that are curing heart disease, diabetes, autoimmune diseases based on animal food diets? I submit there are none, because those diets don't reverse heart disease, they result in an increase in heart disease. Okay.
Okay, now we're going to hear from those against the motion. I did want to mention, neglected to mention that if you have questions, we will have a Q&A session at the end, but you need to write them on the index card that's at your seat, and then we'll collect them toward the end of the debate, and we'll go through and see which ones are commonly coming up, and then present the questions to our debaters. So if you think of a question, go ahead and write it on your card that has been provided. If you need a card, you can flag me down. And then we'll look at it. So can I hand it over to Dhruva Bhat?
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Dhruva, and I'm here to debate for the negative side from the Harvard College debating unit. Let's be very clear about one thing. I'm a vegetarian, but I think it was Voltaire who said, I may be a vegetarian, but I will defend to my death and the deaths of thousands of animals your right to eat meat. And that's why I'm proud to stand on this side arguing for what we think is a reasonably healthy and ethical diet. What we need to think about is the fact that pretty much any diet can be both unethical and unhealthy. So this is an example of a tea plantation. Tea is something that's widely considered vegan. You can correct me if I'm mistaken. But tea plantations can employ workers who work there as indentured laborers for hours and hours every day in incredibly horrible conditions. Which is to say, you can be a vegan and participate in incredibly unhealthy forms of production of food and vegetables as well. Most diets can also be unhealthy. So Angelina Jolie claims a vegan diet nearly killed her without the in-laws. But more broadly, if you think about the kinds of foods that are considered vegetarian or vegan, right? Things such as Oreos are vegan, potatoes are vegan. All of these are incredibly carb-heavy diets, which often also include processed sugars, also include processed fats, and things like that, which can be incredibly unhealthy for you. That's why we had a real problem with John's argument there when he talked about how people naturally want calorie-dense food. What that suggests is that it's not meat that's the problem. It's the fact that people crave these calories, and if they don't get it through meat, for instance, he pointed out that in India as well, obesity is increasing, despite the fact that a large number of people in India subscribe to a largely vegetarian diet. That's because instead of eating like calorie-heavy meats, they eat calorie-heavy chocolates or candy or sweets or all of these other things that can contribute to an incredibly unhealthy diet while still being vegetarian or vegan or whatever it is. So what's the debate today? Because neither side is going to prove conclusively that one is always healthier or always more ethical than the other. The question is, can we eat meat in a way that is healthy and ethical? We as people who are motivated to do good for the world, presumably, people who are reasonably smart, is it possible for us to construct a diet that includes meat but does that in a way that's healthy and ethical? We're going to suggest that the answer is yes. So what we support is meat that's largely cruelty-free, so free-range food, which is animals which are killed painlessly, primarily unprocessed white and lean meat, so fish, poultry, but also if you're eating red meat, lean cuts of those meats. And in addition to this, a balanced diet and exercise, much as I'm sure they would support as well. Is this possible? John did us a paper and quoted Harvard research, so we're going to quote Whole Foods. If we do think it's possible, they do provide meat that's incredibly humane, that's bred on free ranges, that doesn't have any kind of chemical alterations, and we genuinely think if it's good enough for Whole Foods, it's good enough for us. So that's what we support on our side of the house. Let's look at the question here. Does vegetarianism or veganism actually cause better health outcomes? All of us who've been to a statistics class basically know that correlation does not imply causation. And that's the problem with the vast majority of the research cited by their side of the house, which is to say that they've given us lots and lots of research which shows if you have a vegetarian diet, you may not have cancer you might be less likely to have cancer in comparison to someone who eats meat. But that in no way proves that it is being vegetarian that actually causes you to not have cancer. We think it's far more likely that people who choose to be vegetarian or vegan are also more health conscious more generally, are probably more likely to exercise, are probably more likely to engage in the kinds of lifestyles that make you less likely to have heart disease in the first place. Another possible omitted variable is that vegetarians and vegans on balance might be wealthier than the average person who eats meat, which means they have access to better forms of healthcare and better access to the kinds of lifestyles that mean you don't get these kinds of issues. So we suggest that the vast majority of the research they've shown us is exclusively correlational. And it's the kind of research which would say, scientists on average have deeper voices than an average member of the audience. Ignoring the fact that men are heavily overrepresented in the sample of scientists, and men have deeper voices than women, and therefore it's the fact that omitted variable of being male that's causing the deeper voices, not the fact of being a scientist that's actually causing you to have a deeper voice. So if they want to prove that it's actually being a vegetarian that results in preventing all of these diseases, they're going to have to point to much more substantial research than just correlational studies. So the only thing the only piece of research left standing on their side of the house then is the Seventh-day Adventist study, right? Which is to say, for them, pretty much everything else was held constant because everyone lived a healthy lifestyle. Even then, they found higher BMI for people who ate meat than those who didn't. So, in order to complicate that and suggest that there is evidence on the other side, let's present a study of our own. So we do think that there exist studies such as this one in Austria, which looked at over 3,000 people in Austria and showed that Austrian adults who consume a vegetarian diet are less healthy in terms of cancer, allergies, and mental health disorders, have a lower quality of life, and also require more medical treatment. We think at the very least the existence of research such as this complicates the question of whether or not vegetarianism is unanimously good for people everywhere. We think the second thing here is that there's a second part of the study, which is these people are also more likely to suffer from certain conditions like asthma, cancer, and mental illness. This is what an economist, and I study economics, would call a general equilibrium effect, which is to say, even if all their research is correct, and vegetarians are likely to have a lower BMI and are less likely to suffer from cancer, that ignores the fact that these people might be more likely to suffer from some other disease, such as AIDS, which they haven't tested for, or something else. And the problem with that is that they haven't actually checked whether these people in total are healthier and are better for all diseases than simply the specific diseases that they look for. The problem with this is that they're presenting incredibly specific research focused on specific diseases, and they need to look at other things that these people might be subject to. The final thing we're going to suggest is that meat might actually be good for you. And the reason why we would believe specific research is if there were reasons to suspect that if there were reasonable arguments to make for why that's true. So why do we think that meat is probably healthy for you? There are many nutrients that come from meat which is different to nutrients from plants. So the reason people ask us vegetarians where we get our protein from is not because people don't realize, but some people might not, that vegetables don't have protein. The problem is that animal and plant proteins are absorbed by the body in fundamentally different ways because of the amino acids that exist within them. The amino acids which are in plant proteins are more similar to the human body, and therefore it's easier for human bodies to absorb proteins from animal proteins rather than plant proteins. We also think that things such as omega-3 are incredibly common, both in terms of just how much there is in an animal diet, but also in the kinds of forms that is more easily absorbed by the body. This is why, for instance, when I was young and I was like a vegetarian who really cared about animals, I was prescribed cod liver oil by the doctors. And I took it, right? Because I was like, this is omega-3, this is something I need. I then looked up what a cod was, and I was horrified back then. But the fact that the doctors prescribed it to me is because of the fact that omega-3 is so important for us in terms of how our bodies function, and yet it's hard to access when you're not engaging in a plant-based diet. Another possible nutrient is the fact that you need vitamin B12, which is important for red blood cells, for nerves, and for brain function, which is largely only available in animal products. Creatine and carnosine, which is important for muscles, have been found to be largely available only in animal products. Vitamin D, which is necessary for preventing osteoporosis, cancer, heart disease, and so on, are largely seen only in animal products. The only argument they can make here then is that it's possible to get this through additions to our diet. But even those are largely taken from animals and made using animal products, and then in that situation, if they are prescribing those, that's not a vegan diet anymore, and they need to accept that veganism is not a wholesome lifestyle for most people. The final thing we're going to suggest is mental health, because we think that for far too long, science is focused on physical health as the exclusive realm of what health is. We think mental health is an incredibly important part of our health for a couple of reasons. One is to say that if you're suffering from incredibly severe depression or other mental health issues, it makes your life incredibly hard to continue living. It makes you dysfunctional in many ways. It makes you consider thoughts of suicide, and all of these things which make life significantly significantly less likely to continue living. But the other thing is, even if you're not suffering from as severe of a mental disorder or a mental health disorder as depression or something like that, simply continually being sad for long periods of time may not be something that people consider as something that contributes to a healthy lifestyle. Which is to say, if we show you that people can be happy because of eating meat and would rather take a 10% risk of dying in return for that happiness, we think that's a totally healthy lifestyle because mental health is as important as physical health. So we think in the Austrian study, we did see that eating exclusively vegetables was correlated with a lower quality of life and mental health disorders in the Austrian study. And then there was an Australian study, which is a different country, where a lot of red meat was tied to depression in the study of about 1,000 Australian women. We think that this is fundamentally understudied, and we recognize that that's a problem, and we do think that there needs to be much more research in this situation. But are there reasonable arguments to believe that people might be less happy because of not eating meat? And if we convince you that you might be less happy not eating meat, then you can make the decision in terms of your health as to whether you value a couple of extra years at the end of your life over your happiness while you're alive. And we think that there are a couple of reasons to believe that eating meat does contribute to lower mental health. The first one is just in terms of the nutrients that your body requires. As I said, research is not nearly sufficient on this. But there are things. I've heard that meat is incredibly tasty, and giving up something that you've grown up enjoying and liking might make you feel sadder than you would have been otherwise. We're not sure if that's a compromise that most people are worth making. Second thing is that it increases your conflict with family and friends. I've lost count of the number of times I've had to justify my vegetarianism to other people, and each time I have to do that, it's like a fundamental part of my identity is being questioned. If you don't want to have those continuous conversations over and over again, your life might just be easier if you continue eating meat, and we think that that's a mental health compromise that's totally respectable for you to make. A final important component of your mental health is how you associate with your culture and with your society around you. Recognize that meat has fundamental cultural, religious, and symbolic importance to many, many communities and societies around the world. So if you don't eat meat, it makes participating in traditions such as Thanksgiving dinner much less meaningful to you and much harder for you in general. It means that as Diwali comes around, it's a Hindu celebration of life, I can't participate with my community because they're handing out sweets to each other which are full of milk and sugar, and I can't consume those because of the fact that I'm a vegan. It means that Eid dinners, when you break your fast, you can't participate as fully in that. It means Christmas dinners are much less meaningful to you. People care about their culture, people care about their religion, and we think it is totally reasonable from the standpoint of mental health for people to make that decision for themselves as to whether they value these ties to society and family over a couple of years at the end of their lives. We think that's a totally reasonable health compromise. For all these reasons, we're proud to oppose.
Hello. As I get this set up, just sort of apropos nothing. Did people hear that Bill Gates bought the Seattle Times this morning?
Yes.
I know, he buys it every morning. Thank you. That's like my favorite joke. All right, so thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to all of the group sponsors, but especially to Holly and the Effective Altruism organization that put in the bulk of the work on and the Debate Society. Thank you to Dhruva and Danny for all of the preparation and for hosting us and for coming, and Dhruva for that excellent argument. John and I are making the case that eating meat is unethical and unhealthy, and I would like to start by polling the audience. Who here tries where you can to make decisions that are environmentally friendly? I think we have unanimity other than people who are on their phone. Who here thinks that if you can make a decision that helps rather than harms an animal, you should make that decision? Close to unanimity on that. And who thinks that we should try to help somebody who's in poverty where that's easy to do? Yeah, okay, I think we have unanimity on that. It's going to be my contention that if you answered that we should help people in poverty, or that we should make environmentally conscious choices, or that we should help animals, then you have to agree with John and me that eating meat is unethical. Speak first about global poverty. I'm going to see if I can hook this up so that I can come out from behind this lectern. How's this? Awesome. Oh, this is so much better. This one makes intuitive sense. I weigh about 185 pounds. If I do nothing but lay in bed watching reruns of The Apprentice, I'm going to burn like 2,000 calories a day. Except when I get excited, I'm, fire him, Donald, fire him! Then it ticks up a little bit as my adrenaline charges. That same sort of basic physiological relationship is also true for all animals. The vast majority of what you feed to a chicken or a pig or a cow or a farm fish, the vast majority of what you feed to them, they expend simply existing. The most efficient meat is chicken, and it still takes 9 calories fed to a chicken to get 1 calorie back out in the form of that animal's flesh. So who here would go to your refrigerator, take out 9 plates of food, throw them in the trash, and eat 1 plate of food? Anybody here? Bring it on! Get this experiment in the human experience over with. Yeah, no, nobody, right? Probably most of you are concerned about food waste. And we should be concerned about food waste. About 40% of everything that's produced is thrown away, which strikes me as an ethical problem that we should be striving to address. And yet, anytime any of us eats chicken, which is the most efficient meat, 800% of the caloric production is essentially wasted. It goes into the chicken expends it existing, we don't end up eating it. So roughly, 48 times, 800% of the harm of standard food waste. So that's the 9 calories. If you're eating plant-based foods, 1-to-1, right? You eat 1 calorie of plant-based foods, you've eaten 1 calorie of plant-based foods. You eat chicken, the most efficient meat, and you're wasting 8 of those calories. This guy is Jean Ziegler. He's the global envoy on food to the United Nations. A number of years ago, he called biofuels a crime against humanity because about 100 billion metric tons of corn and wheat is being grown and turned into biofuels. Well, roughly 850 million people are living in nutritional deficit. They're not taking in enough calories to sustain basic life functioning. And he said that's a crime against humanity. It drives up the price of those crops. It throws people off their land. It leads to starvation. So who thinks he has a plausible case? Okay, yeah, like 75% of you think he has a plausible case. Some people went like this just to make sure that they're focusing on plausible. The same UN Food and Agricultural Organization report found that 756 million metric tons of corn and wheat was fed to chickens and pigs and cows and farm fish and other farm animals. And that doesn't even include the 85% of the global soy crop, which is another 200 million metric tons of corn and wheat. So crime against humanity strikes me as unethical, and we are wasting more than 10 times as much corn, wheat, and soy, feeding it to farmed animals and not turning it into calories for human beings, than for biofuels. So if we care about sustainability, if we care about the global poor, eating meat is unethical. The second point is environmentalism. And this one also makes intuitive sense. So make no mistake about it, plant-based foods require a lot of energy and create a lot of pollution. If you're tilling the soil and plowing the fields and growing the crops and shipping the crops and turning them into whatever plant-based food, that requires a lot of energy and it creates a lot of pollution. The thing is, you still have to do all of that for animal-based foods. So now you're growing, and you have to do it 9 times as much for the most efficient. In addition, you're growing the crops, you're shipping the crops to a feed mill, you're operating the feed mill, you're shipping the feed to the factory farm or the farm, you're operating the farm, you're shipping the animals to the slaughterhouse, you're operating the slaughterhouse. It's 3 or 4 extra stages of energy-intensive including vehicles, and at least 2 or 3 extra energy-intensive including factories. The United Nations released a 400-page report called Livestock's Long Shadow that dives into these inefficiencies. And they found that animal agriculture is one of the most significant contributors to the most serious environmental problems at every scale, from local to global. Specifically, animal agriculture contributes to problems of land degradation, climate change and air pollution, water shortage and water pollution, and loss of biodiversity. And on the hot topic among environmentalists, climate change. They found that animal agriculture causes 40% more global warming than all SUVs, 18-wheelers, jumbo jets, all forms of transportation combined. So transport, in terms of climate change, is about 13%. Animal agriculture, according to this report, is about 18%. And the least polluting animal, it won't surprise you to know, is also the most efficient animal, and that's chickens. And chickens, on a per-calorie basis, create 27 times the CO2 of legumes like soy and peas. 27 times, so 2,700%. And if what you want is protein calories, you're talking about 40 times the CO2 equivalent for chicken as opposed to legumes. So every time we choose to eat chicken, the least climate change inducing meat, every time we choose to eat chicken, we're eating something that causes 27 times, 2,700% of the climate change. So I think just about everybody in this room said that where we can, we should make choices that are environmentally conscious. If you're choosing to eat chicken, you're not doing that. Like this guy, this is Beaky. And then the third ethical issue that I want to talk about is the simple issue of eating animals unnecessarily. This is Rena. I know, she's a looker, huh? Those eyes. That was my heart. Who here would eat Rena? Usually it's at least somebody who's like, I'll eat your cat! My wife would beat you up. There are no takers for eating Rena, right? And that's because we understand that Rena is an individual, and we have a cultural sensitivity that understands that cats and dogs are individuals, and most of us, unless you're on a desert island and, it's you or the cat, most of us aren't going to eat a dog or a cat. But good luck coming up with anything that approximates an ethical justification, an ethical argument for how it's different to eat Rena as opposed to Beaky. And in fact, Beaky, chickens outperform dogs and cats and cattle and an awful lot of other species on tests of cognitive and behavioral sophistication. So, anybody here who would eat chompers? Also an insanely cute dog, but not my insanely cute dog, so it doesn't get me going in quite the same way. Again, nobody's going to eat chompers, and yet anybody in here who eats animal products would happily eat Fiona if they didn't know her and didn't see how cute she was. And Charles Darwin taught us that other animals are more like us than they're unlike us. Darwin taught us that differences between human beings and other species of animal, they're differences of degree. They're not differences of kind. Other animals are made of flesh and blood and bone, just like we are. Other animals have the same 5 physiological senses that we do. And other animals have the same range of emotions that we do. The foremost living evolutionary biologist, Richard Dawkins, calls other species of animals our evolutionary cousins because they are more similar to us than they are dissimilar from us. I just nodded at the concept of the inner world of farm animals, but it is worth noting that chickens and pigs, at least, outperform dogs and cats on tests of ethological sophistication, which means behavior, emotion, cognition. Pigs and chickens are more emotionally, behaviorally, and cognitively complex than dogs and cats. You really are eating someone rather than something if you're eating animals. Jane Goodall, the primatologist, points out in the introduction to this book, farm animals feel pleasure and sadness, excitement and resentment, depression, fear, and pain. They are far more aware and intelligent than we ever imagined. They are individuals in their own right. And if we're eating the vast majority of animals, this is what we're supporting. We're supporting cramming tens of thousands of them into sheds where they can barely move, and where they are growing, chickens at least, more than 6 times as quickly as they would naturally. Researchers at the University of Arkansas said that modern broiler chickens grow so quickly that if they were human beings, if it was a human baby, by the age of 1, she would weigh more than 650 pounds. And imagine the abject misery of every single one of those animals if by the age of, the equivalent, imagine a human baby, 1-year-old, 650 pounds. These chickens suffer from massive rates of lung failure, heart collapse, crippling leg deformities. Alice Walker says eating chickens is eating misery. So if you want to make choices that cast your lot against global poverty, for the environment, and for animals, ethically speaking, the only diet is a plant-based diet. So I would like to go to, I thought I had slides that had to do with, okay. I want to address what Dhruva was talking about with regard to correlation, not cause, briefly. So as John pointed out, the Adventist study, the work of Caldwell Esselstyn, the work of Dean Ornish. And what Dean Ornish and Caldwell Esselstyn did is they took people who had advanced stage heart disease, they put them on a low-fat vegan diet, and they actually unclogged their arteries. And that's not correlation, that is a direct effect of putting them on the low-fat vegan diet. They also found that they lost a lot of weight, their arteries unclogged. If they were on diabetes medication, oftentimes they were able to get off of the diabetes medication. Similarly, the Adventists, as Dhruva, I think, rightly noted, the Adventists, the only difference for the Adventists was that the vegans had the lowest BMI, the lowest BMIs, were the longest lived, had the lowest rates of cancer, and so on. And in fact, the American Dietetic Association looked at literally all of the research that's ever been done on vegetarian and vegan diets. And they said that vegetarian and vegan diets are healthy for all stages of the life cycle, including infancy and including pregnancy, and that in fact, vegetarians and vegans tended to be healthier than meat eaters because they had lower rates of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, obesity, all of the things that John was talking about. Dhruva brought up one Austrian study of Austrian adults. There wasn't a lot of information on it. John and I have both read most of the studies, the research pro and con, so that we could dive into the research con to see whether it's good. And neither of us had even heard of this study, but it was clearly falls victim to Dhruva's concern about correlation and cause, right? I mean, it was just a bunch of Austrians that were less healthy, they claimed, on a vegetarian or a vegan diet. I will say that the American Dietetic Association, the USDA, the American Heart Association, the American Institute of Cancer Research, on the basis of all of the work that's been done, these organizations endorse a vegetarian and a vegan diet. Also point out that just earlier this year, the National Academy of Sciences released a report, and it said that premature mortality could be cut by 6 to 10% if people cut back on their animal product consumption. And it was interesting, if you pull up that study, 6% was if you cut back to about a third of what people are consuming now. 8.5% was a vegetarian diet, and 10% was a vegan diet. Again, based on all of the evidence, the clinical evidence, the epidemiological evidence, all of the evidence, a vegetarian and a vegan diet appears to be the most healthy, according to all of the people who have done the meta-reviews. Finally, all of the mental health speculation. So there's the one correlation, not cause study about Australia, and then a bunch of speculation for why it might be more difficult to be a vegetarian or a vegan. It's all speculation, it's not studies. John and I are extraordinarily healthy. In cross-examination, I'll ask Dhruva, he seems like a healthy and happy guy. Gandhi said that true peace and happiness is when what we believe aligns with what we do. And it seems to me that if you believe that this is the ethical way to behave, you will be mentally healthier rather than mentally unhealthier. In any event, if you care about the environment, you care about the global poor, you care about animals, and you care about your health, I hope you'll join John and me in supporting the resolution. Thank you. You want this one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out here and coming to the debate. Okay, so I want to start with a question of my own, which is, how many people here like cheeseburgers? I do. I think there are also like some vegetarians that came here explicitly for the debate, so you're biased. Anyways, I want to talk to you about three things in this speech. The first is some of the ethical concerns behind eating meat. The second is low-income individuals, and the third is the environment, dealing with a lot of the material we heard in the last speech. So, first on ethics. So, one of the, and also behind effective altruism, one of the most famous philosophers in defense of the idea that we should not eat animals is Peter Singer, and he makes a utilitarian argument saying that we should try to avoid suffering when suffering exists. But there are a couple problems with this idea that this creates an obligation against eating meat. So the first thing is, if you like bacon, you're probably the reason that Fiona from that last slide is alive in the first place. So we think along these lines that if we have an obligation to promote the maximum amount of life and the maximum amount of pleasure possible, and creating the demand for meat because people like eating meat creates lives for these animals that otherwise wouldn't exist. That if we're treating them well and adhering to the standards that Dhruva laid out to you in his speech, we think we're giving these animals an opportunity to exist that otherwise wouldn't. Because why would these pigs, why would we raise them in the first place if there wasn't some sort of demand to do so? But the second thing is recognize that vegetarians aren't totally innocent either. Because in producing plants, a lot of things like pesticides go into producing plants, killing small rodents, and in fact, in a recent philosophy paper from Stephen Davis, he calculates the amount of people, or the amount of small animals that would have to die in order to fund and sustain a vegan diet, and it would be about 1.8 billion animals would have to be killed in terms of little rats, little small rodents, etc. And if their argument extends that chickens are important, then their argument would also extend to this. But the second thing is rights, because they say that we have some intrinsic moral obligation to avoid the suffering of other animals. So a couple things here. The first thing is we think rights need to be based on the idea of reciprocity, that we grant rights because other people respect it. Now, I think if you put me alone in a cage with a lion, I wouldn't exactly be safe. And I wouldn't blame that lion either, because I think I'd be delicious. But the basic idea is that because animals don't respect rights, we don't include them in the rights-holding community, and we can treat them in ways that we treat differently from the way we treat people. So, taking an intuitive example, how many people think if you're driving and you run over a squirrel, you should go to prison? Anyone? Now, how many people think if you're driving and you run over a human, you should go to prison? Yeah, intuitively. That there's some basis for how we treat people that's different from how we treat animals, and we think this is okay because of the type of community that we've laid out. So, animal rights advocates earnestly believe that rights are disconnected from duties, but we would disagree with that. So, second thing, low-income individuals. Being a vegetarian is expensive. Imagine seeing $419.26 at the bottom of your grocery receipt. So it's just for 1 week, and it's just for you. This is how much it costs vegan ultra runner Scott Jurek to eat per week. And of course, he bought it at Whole Foods. So, the point though is that particularly for people who want to eat out, or people who don't have the time to cook their own food all the time, vegetarian diets can be particularly expensive, which is why a veggie burger often costs more than a regular burger. And as a result, the demands placed on people when they don't eat meat are often significant. Last thing, in terms of environmental concerns. So, in the last speech, we get this sort of caloric comparison between what a chicken produces versus a human in this 9:1 ratio. But part of the problem is that a lot of this is comparing individual food items instead of the collective effect of diets. So while it might be the case that a chicken requires a lot of food to go into it, a chicken is also more calorie dense than something like broccoli. And as we heard from them themselves, you cannot sustain an entire diet just based on vegetables because it doesn't provide enough calories. So this study from these scientists report in March 2016 found that vegetables and shifting to a low meat diet would actually increase a lot of different types of pollution. And the reason is that when you do the type of comparison where you can't just compare a kilogram of beef, which is over 2,000 calories, to a kilogram of broccoli, which is only about 300 calories. Instead, when you compare what a diet that would involve meat products and more than just 10% versus the recommended low meat type of diet, you see that both energy use, water use, and greenhouse gas emissions go up because of the amount of increased space and the increased resources needed to fund the extra amount of vegetables to sustain such a diet. So if you look at scenario 1, that's generally people's diets right now, just getting the recommended calories, but not taking particular food items. But then when you look at recommended food mixes that are more vegetable heavy and more plant-based heavy, the amount of emissions go up. And we see that's a particular reason that we think it's bad for the environment when people have to move away from meat-based diets. And that is it. So, thank you.
So now we do cross-examination. How do you want to do this? Maybe you ask a question, we ask a question. Yeah. Oh yeah, let me grab the shirt line.
Don't forget to work on your questions for afterwards.
I guess we'll start by asking you guys a question. So, you use that correlation argument, and correlation doesn't prove causation, correlation doesn't prove causation, but where are the studies that show high correlation for eating animal-centered diets, lowering heart disease, lowering cancer, lowering diabetes, lowering BMIs? You can't just dismiss all the epidemiological evidence because it doesn't support your argument. Where are the correlations that support your position?
So we give you 2 studies. One was using the Austrian Interview Health Survey, which has to do with about 3,000 Austrian people who were interviewed, and their diets were measured, and it showed the things that I showed you on the slide. And similarly in Australia, 1,000 women, and it showed a relationship between eating less red meat and depression. I'm happy to share that if you want to hear of those on those studies if you wish to see that.
No, my question was heart disease, cancer, diabetes, longevity. Where are the studies that support meat-centered diets as superior to plant-based diets?
Right. So I think the problem here is saying we have some correlational research, therefore, and we have some correlational research isn't necessarily going to prove the argument for either side unless we have a way of showing causation through essentially randomizing the diets people have. That's the only way that we can actually prove it.
The correlations are not equal. The evidence is overwhelming. You've got an outlier study about mental health, and you think that therefore equalizes thousands and thousands and thousands of other studies that support our position.
No, we think correlational research on both sides is insufficient and we need some kind of causational research.
You guys want to ask a question?
Sure. This is a question to John. In the past, you've suggested that climate change is not necessarily bad, and in fact, warmer climates might actually be better for some people. Do you think Bruce's argument about how eating animals is worse for the environment is maybe slightly exaggerated, and we could adapt to increasing environmental harms in that situation?
Yeah, I don't talk about climate change, abortion, religion, because the media always misquotes me and uses things out of context. So I'm gonna dodge that question.
But I will say, the United Nations looking at even if you think that climate change is not problematic, you're talking about water use, water pollution, loss of biodiversity, desertification, throwing people off the land. So it's really, the United Nations said every environmental problem, from the smallest and most local to the largest and most global, animal agriculture is one of the top 3 causes. So, as I understand it, your argument is that for the ethical argument with regard to animals specifically is that as long as the animals lead a very high welfare life, we're bringing them into existence and they're better off existing than not existing. Would you agree with us that the 98% of animals who are factory farmed, that eating those animals is unethical?
So we're totally fine with reforms in place to make sure that animals are treated humanely. Question for you.
Wait. That was not an answer to my question.
Yeah, so we think right now a lot of factory farming should be reformed so that it treats animals better, similar to how Whole Foods treats the animals that it uses for its meat products.
So is the way that the animals are treated, is the way that the chickens I was talking about who are bred to grow so quickly they can't even walk and their entire lives are misery, is that unethical?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
As long as you'll concede the 99%, we'll give you the 1%.
So you seem to think that animals have rights. So my question is, would you release your cat into the wild because having a pet would be the same as having a slave, along the lines that animals have rights?
Well, now I don't have to address that in my speech. I'm so excited. So the idea of animals having rights is animals having rights that are meaningful to them, right? So the right not to be eaten, that's a meaningful right for an animal. The right to be sent out into the wild to fend for themselves, that's like almost an anti-right for an animal. In the same way that when we get to be 21 and we have the capacity to drive a car, we should have a right without regard to race, religion, creed, etc. to drive a car. We shouldn't discriminate against some human beings. With regard to that right, not really that useful for my cat Rena or my other cats, Angie and Tigger. They don't want to drive a car. But that doesn't mean that they don't have a right not to be eaten.
How much time do we have? A minute, okay.
One thing that's confusing, what you guys were talking about, the field and the rodents that are killed in the field, but then you didn't address Bruce's arguments that, in fact, to produce animal foods requires far more farmland. So if you really care about the rodents that are in the fields, you will support a plant-based diet because a lot fewer are killed growing crops for people to eat than it is growing crops to feed animals for people to eat. So you're actually killing a lot more rodents. How do you respond to that?
So because animals are a lot more calorie dense than people, the space is ultimately less, whereas if you shift to everyone eating for a plant-based diet, the amount of plants that would have to be produced would increase.
That's just not true. We showed that all of these livestock animals are fed corn and soy, and that the conversion rates, chickens are the best at 9-to-1, and that's the best. Beef is 27-to-1? The amount of crop land that's used to feed animals and the inadvertent deaths that come from that. I'm just saying your argument's contradictory.
Right, and a chicken eats a lot less than a person, and we think when you account for the diet, as the study we showed you does, that the net increase in pollution would be positive.
No, because you have a straw man. You're talking about broccoli. You're not talking about I'm not talking about corn and wheat and sweet potatoes and potatoes. If you'd use that, your argument would have fallen apart.
Yes, I mean, oh,
Why is the alphabet in that order? Is it because of that song? Quality humor right there. How do I get the... I think so, yeah. How do I get the PowerPoint back up?
Sorry.
That's all right.
In the meantime, let me say, if you have a question, write it down in a card, and I'm going to come by the aisles and collect them during the closing statement. And then we'll ask questions afterwards.
I went to a diner and said breakfast served anytime. I asked for vegan scrambled eggs during the Renaissance. I'm just going to keep doing Stephen Wright jokes. All right, resolved. Eating meat is unhealthy and unethical. First, unhealthy. The China study, which John talked about, is the largest epidemiological study in the history of the world. And what T. Colin Campbell found in the China study is that there is a linear increase in cancer rate as animal product consumption went up from zero. Cancer rates went up. And the conclusion of T. Colin Campbell is that the ideal amount of animal products for people to have in the diet is zero. It's a book-length treatment of the issue. I encourage people to check it out. Some of this could fall prey to correlation and cause, but an awful lot of it does not. He looks at clinical evidence, he looks at epidemiological evidence, and concludes that the ideal amount of animal products is zero. Similarly, prevent and reverse heart disease, which has not been in any way debunked by our debate opponents. A completely vegetarian diet actually used to cure heart disease, both Dean Ornish and Caldwell Esselstyn. And then the Adventist study. The healthiest Adventist controls for everything else. The healthiest Adventists were the vegan Adventists who had the lowest rates of heart disease, cancer, and obesity. American Dietetic Association, as I mentioned earlier, this is a quote from their position paper on vegetarian and vegan diets. Vegetarians have lower rates of heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, cancer, and obesity than meat eaters. Vegetarian diets actually have health benefits in the prevention and treatment of certain diseases. So from a health standpoint, vegetarianism is the way to go. In terms of global poverty, not seriously challenged by our opponents. The World Watch Institute puts it this way: meat production is an inefficient use of grain. The grain is used more efficiently when consumed directly by humans. Continued growth in meat output is dependent on feeding grain to animals, creating competition for grain between affluent meat eaters and the world's poor. It's literally the case that every time we choose to eat animal products, we're essentially throwing away 8 plates of food or more for every calorie of food, every plate of food that we're consuming, which is unethical. CO2, who here thinks climate change is a problem? Okay, so almost everybody thinks climate change is a problem. Who thinks water pollution is a problem? Okay, I think I got unanimity for water pollution is a problem. Loss of biodiversity, desertification, like every single issue, animal product consumption causes exponentially more of it than eating the crops directly. Again, not an issue that was seriously challenged. So if you care about the global poor or you care about the environment, you have to side with the affirmative today. And then finally, also not seriously questioned, well, somewhat questioned with the idea of the 1% of animals who may live lives worth leading. As John said, if everybody in here agrees with us and with our debate opponents that 99%, including 100% of what's served in your cafeteria and 100% of what you're going to find in any grocery store, and except Whole Foods, in any restaurant around the country. No, I mean, Whole Foods is making things significantly less bad At level 5, the animals have lives worth living, but from level 1 to 5, the reason there's a level 1 to 5, if you look at what's actually happening, it goes from level 1, which is better than the worst factory farming, but far from good, up to level 5, which is lives worth living, but I'll address that in just a second. With regard to animal product consumption, I really like what Percy Shelley, the poet, this is Percy Shelley is my homeboy. There are no good photos of Percy Shelley on Google, so I went with this. I like what Percy Shelley said in explaining his vegetarianism. He said, I want no part of anything I can't write a pleasant poem about. I like that concept. I'm not a poet. I can't write a pleasant poem about anything. But applied to basic integrity, I think this makes a lot of sense. Everybody in this room could spend an afternoon taking part in every aspect of getting plant-based foods to the table. Beans, nuts, fruits, vegetables, everybody in here, no moral qualms about any aspect of what happens to get fruits and vegetables to the table. How many people here would want to spend an afternoon slicing chickens' throats open? Okay, so we got one. Danny wants to spend an afternoon slicing chickens' throats open. But nobody else, right? Most people, even high welfare animals, their throats end up slit open at the end. And that is ethically problematic. Maybe if it's you or the chicken, you can justify it. But if it's not you or the chicken, for the same reason nobody in here was willing to eat Rena or willing to eat Chompers, the cat and the dog on the screen, because it is ethically problematic to do so, and because you would want to kill the animals themselves, for the same reason, there's no justification for eating a chicken or a pig or a cow or some animal who you don't happen to know. Most people wouldn't do it. Most people don't want to see it. Most people don't even want to think about it. And so you have to ask yourself, what is the ethical justification for paying somebody to treat animals in a way that I wouldn't do it myself, and I don't even want to see it, and I don't even want to think about it, even for high welfare meat. If you care about animals and you wouldn't eat a dog or a cat, don't pay somebody else to kill a chicken or a pig or another animal for you. So for the global poor, for the environment, for animals, eating meat is unethical. And as just discussed, it's also unhealthy. I want to talk about a couple of Danny's arguments. First, Danny talked about Fiona and said that Fiona would not live except for bacon lovers, and that they lead lives worth living, and that we should bring them into the world in order so that we can slaughter them and eat them, and that's better for them. It really sounds an awful lot like we had to destroy the village in order to eat it. I mean, in order to save it, doesn't it? First, none of these animals are treated well. There are gradations of bad treatment. All of them are slaughtered, as I just intimated. None of them have to be slaughtered. Will be healthier if they're not slaughtered. And for the same reason, nobody in here would say, yes, I'm going to eat a dog or a cat, and it gives the dog or a cat a life worth living. We recognize that it's ethically problematic to betray that animal by slaughtering them and eating them at the end of it. Exact same thing with regard to chickens and pigs and other farm animals. The Stephen Davis study, as John intimated in the cross-examination, it is just an awful and not peer-reviewed study. And if you pull it up, the Stephen Davis study, exactly what John said is true. It's talking about tilling up crops and the animals dying and the tilling up of the crops. And it completely ignores the fact that you have to till up 9 times as many crops if you're going to eat chicken, 15 times as many if you're going to eat pigs, 20-something times as many as you're going to eat cattle. So if you think that the Stephen Davis study has something to say about ethics, it has that to say exponentially more about meat eating as opposed to crops. The rights and responsibilities point fell when he granted that we do, in fact, have an ethical obligation not to support factory farming in the cross-examination. Regardless of rights and responsibilities, it's ethically problematic to cause animals harm. It's also ethically problematic, as they haven't talked about at all, to cause the global poor harm and just destroy our environment. He talked about the cost of vegetarianism, which is just silly. The fact that Scott Jurek, who eats an astronomical amount of really high-quality vegan food and lots of fruits and vegetables, has a high dietary bill, has nothing to say about the cost of vegetarianism. every restaurant menu that has a vegetarian entree and meat entrees, the vegetarian entree is the cheapest because vegetarian production is the cheapest. The environmental concerns about the broccoli-based diet, there's literally not an environmental organization on the planet that agrees with that analysis. Every single one grants that meat production is ethically compromised, is environmentally compromised for all of the reasons that I just spelled out. And I think that's it. If you care about your health, a plant-based diet is the best diet. If you care about the global poor or the environment or animals, you have to side with John and me that eating meat is unhealthy and unethical. Thank you.
So, here's the frustrating thing about this debate. They want us to defend factory farming. They want us to defend pumping animals with steroids. But the kind of vegan diet that they want to support is one that's made of legumes and sweet potatoes, not chips and fries and sweets and vegan pizza and all of these other incredibly unhealthy things that people are likely to turn to when you tell them that they can't eat meat anymore. It's not fair to debate if you expect us to defend the worst forms of eating meat when they get to defend the best forms of eating vegetarian food. We're going to argue that it's possible, and we think we've argued that it is possible to eat meat in both a healthy and an ethical way, and that's what we think everyone in this room should be doing. First question, is it possible to eat meat in a healthy way? The vast majority of research doesn't show that vegetarianism in any way causes the things that they talk about. They pointed to lots of research that might show causation, but we don't think that's enough to actually get them to win that point for their side of the house. We also pointed to studies. We showed the study from Austria which looked at the Austrian health interview and the study from Australia which showed this. We're willing to share this with anyone who's interested in reading up more about this. We don't actually think that this is the right forum for us to analyze what the p-value of these different research was, what the end was, and try to make any kind of reasonable judgment on the basis of a debate that's verbal on this over here. We think if you want to discuss the research, we can get together over here and do it later. But that said, given that the only way that you can actually prove causation is by entirely randomizing it and controlling for all other factors, we think even then, we did show you that there are certain kinds of nutrients which are better absorbed by the human body through when it's in the animal form rather than in the plant form. So we talk about things like omega-3. We talk about the fact that protein with amino acids in the form of animal amino acids is preferable for the body than plant amino acids. But let's say we don't buy any of them. Let's give them all of their reasons, right? All that shows is that processed red meat is bad for people. We told you that it's possible to eat meat in a way that's healthy. So we support things such as white meat, such as poultry and fish. We support things such as lean cut if you do end up eating red meat. We support exercise in addition to all of these things and in order to ensure that you're actually living a healthy life. We think in this combination, meat is possibly an important part, but definitely a part, something that can add to your health if you do it right. Once again, let's point out that the vegan diet that we need to compare this to is not the perfect vegan diet of just legumes and sweet potatoes. It's what people will turn to. Given that our bodies crave calories, and given that obesity increases even in nations which are largely vegetarian, the fact that the body craves calories means that if you expect people to turn vegetarian, they're likely to turn to the kinds of foods that makes them fat anyway. We don't think that they've actually shown that a vegan diet is necessarily better than a meat eating diet. The final thing we talked about was mental health. And we recognized and we accepted up front that we don't have the research to back this up because research is insufficient in this field. Given that research doesn't exist, what can we do? We can make reasonable arguments to convince you of one side or the other. They didn't even try to respond to the arguments we made about how meat is often an integral part of people's societies, cultures, and religions, and how trying to turn away from that can cause inter-family conflict and cause conflict with friends of yours, which might be a compromise that people are not willing to give up in terms of the mental health harms that can have on them. Saying that Gandhi said that this is true, and the fact that if you believe that something is true, then you feel better when you practice that, assumes that people think that being vegetarian is the right thing to do. Lots of people don't believe this and will be going against the wishes of their family and friends and so on in order to do this. We think it's totally reasonable for them to make that compromise in terms of saying we're willing to live happier lives even if there's a 10% increased risk of dying at the end. Mental health is as important as physical health, and we beg that more research is done in it. But as far as research has not been done, at least engage with the arguments we present. So it is possible to eat meat in a healthy way. In fact, it might even be beneficial for your health to eat meat and specific kinds of meat. So is it possible to eat meat in an ethical way? We had three categories of arguments on our side of the house. The first thing they gave us is stuff about sorry, I messed up my things about animals. Right? They said if you think that animals have rights, you shouldn't be, or if we shouldn't be harming animals, we shouldn't be doing this. What we said is we can all agree, and if we had a show of hands, almost everyone in this room would agree that existing is better than not existing. And because the animal, well, maybe not. We can do this afterwards. And we really are unhappy with the fact that you're interrupting our speeches when we're giving them. We hope you keep your discussions and questions for later. But the vast majority of people overall would agree that existing is preferable to non-existence. In that situation, we think, because of the fact that existence at least gives you the possibility of seeking happiness, we think that we do animals a favor by creating an industry that encourages them to be born and raised in a way that's humane. We recognize that the vast majority of this isn't humane in the status quo, but we don't think each of us individually turning vegan is actually going to do anything to change the entire industry. What we can do is move our dollars to industries that do it in a humane way, right? Because if you think that it's possible for us to vote with our dollars and change the industry, then it's also possible for us to vote with our dollars and push for more humane forms of treating them, where they do live lives worth living insofar as they do live. We didn't understand this argument about burning the village in order to create the village. Our argument is, as long as these animals live, if they're living happy lives, then that's more happiness in the world overall. In a utilitarian sense, which is what a lot of these people believe in, we're creating more happiness. The final thing we told you is reciprocity under animals, which is to say that we don't give animals the same rights we give humans because they don't give us the same rights that they do to us. Their argument in response to this is a couple of things. One was, you wouldn't spend an evening slitting throats open, and therefore we shouldn't be eating meat. The problem is the vast majority of us wouldn't want to spend all of our lives and give up our cushy lives here and do hours and hours of back-breaking work as farmers in southern India, not knowing whether the monsoon is going to come or not, and live in fear of the fact that your savings could all go down the drain. The fact that we wouldn't want to also do that doesn't mean that it's unethical to eat the vegetables that they produce. All it proves is that we sometimes expect other people to do things that we wouldn't do. And that's just a fact of life that's important to keep in mind. We don't understand how that actually makes an ethical argument in any way. The next final thing they told us was about the global poor. That ignores the arguments about how it's often expensive. Let's give you reasons why it's expensive. The fact that lots of people live in food deserts where they don't have access to healthy food. The fact that people live in communities where non-vegetarianism has been the way of life for years and years. Where developing countries around the world, which can't just switch to almond milk because of the fact that you tell them that they can't eat milk anymore. And the fact that even if you could care about these people, it's often more expensive and harder for them to do so, means that that forcing these people to convert to veganism or vegetarianism would be incredibly disastrous for them. We think that's harmful. The final thing we talk about is climate change. It's unclear based on whether these two speakers even agree that this is a problem or not. But if it is, we tell you that there is no line to be drawn here. Every almond that is produced consumes gallons and gallons of water. Vegetables can also be incredibly harmful. The question is, where do you draw the line? And we don't understand this arbitrary drawing of the line for a food that can be eaten in an ethical way and eaten in a healthy way. We're incredibly proud to oppose.
Well, I'm going to end by telling a story, but before I do that, I hear so many sort of specious arguments. I have to address at least a couple of them. Yeah, this whole idea about it's okay to eat animals because your friends and your family, your own mental health. That's such a bad argument. Imagine you're back in the days of legalized slavery, and you're saying, well, we can't free the slaves because that'll upset people. That'll upset our families. That'll upset our culture. You have to ask the question sometimes whether your families and culture are wrong, whether they need to change in the law. It's up to us sometimes to lead the way in doing that. And this whole causation correlation argument, I mean, you'd have to understand these are not equal. There are thousands upon thousands of studies that support what I'm arguing for. And these guys have got some study I've never heard of before. They want to make that equivalent, and we'll talk about it over here. They'll show us their study, and we'll show them our thousands of studies, and that they're all equal. That doesn't add up. And by the way, how many of you think smoking causes lung cancer? Or how many of you believe smoking is harmful? Raise your hand. You got pretty much agreement on that? Can you show me the randomized controlled study that proves that? No, you can't. That's all based on correlation. You can't take human beings and pump smoke in their lungs for 30 years and then say you have a controlled study and some, therefore, are not in the controls. We depend greatly on science that's based on correlation, epidemiological studies. You can't just throw that out because it doesn't support your argument. But I want to finish by telling the story. So I want to make kind of the ethical argument here. So back in the year 2004, it was my honor to, I got to meet Milton Friedman and his wife, Rose. My wife and I, mutual friends, introduced us, and we were taking them out to dinner in San Francisco. So we drove over there and came up to their apartment, condo in Russian Hill, and Milton showed us his Nobel Prize in economics, and which was pretty cool. And then out of the blue, he says, "So John, why are you a vegan?" I said, "I'll tell you what, Milton, I'll make an argument, and if you can answer the argument, I'll stop being a vegan. But if you can't answer the argument, I know you're a man of great intellectual integrity. I expect you to become a vegan." He said, "Okay, you're on." So I said, "Okay, Milton, there's 4 parts to the argument. Number 1, if you eat animals, the animal necessarily has to die. And if it's an animal raised for food in America, over 99% of them were raised in factory farms and had horrible lives. All the food you get in restaurants, all the food you get at traditional supermarkets, let's not kid ourselves. These are factory farm animals. And the fact that there might be a few animals out there that have a better life does not excuse the factory farm system that is where America feeds itself. The cheeseburgers people like, make no mistake, those are coming from factory farms. So, number 2, you don't need to eat animals to be very healthy. In fact, there's compelling, almost overwhelming evidence from the blue zones to the reversal of heart disease to the longevity studies that we've seen and done that eating a primarily whole foods, plant-based diet, by the way, it's a straw man to argue meat's better than sugar. I'll concede the point. When we talk about eating plant-based diets, we're talking about eating real foods, not processed crap. I'll concede meat's healthier than sugar. If you're going to eat one or the other, eat the meat. But that doesn't mean it's better than eating sweet potatoes and broccoli and blueberries and whole food plant foods. So, number 3, the reason why we eat animal foods is because of the very argument that our opponents made. We learned to eat it. It's what we were fed as children. It's what our families believe is healthy. It's what our culture believes is good for us. And so we acquired a taste for it. That's why we eat it, right? Isn't that why people eat animal foods primarily? We just learned to like it. Tastes good. How many people like cheeseburgers? Number 4, can you justify the necessary death and the knowledge that you are causing massive suffering in your lifetime to literally thousands of animals just for the pleasure it gives your own palate? Milton, I can't justify that. I'm a vegan. How do you justify it? He gets extremely thoughtful. He's thinking about it. He looks at his watch and says, "Oops, we got to get to the restaurant. We're going to be late." We were going to this vegetarian restaurant in San Francisco called Dreams. And So we're driving, and he's very silent in the car, so giving me directions, take a left here, take a right at the next light. And we get to the restaurant. About this time, I realize, he's ducking the question. He's not going to answer my argument. And so we sit down, and we get our menus, we start looking at it, and figuring out what I'm going to eat. And all of a sudden, Milton Friedman throws his menu down on the table. And he says, Rose, I cannot answer John's argument to my satisfaction. I have no choice. From this point, I am becoming a vegan. That delighted me and astounded me, but what was even more delightful and funny is what his wife, Rose, did. She throws her menu on the table and says, Milton, don't be ridiculous. We're 92 years old. It's too late for us. Now, Milton Friedman died a couple of years later of a heart attack, and I don't know for sure whether he became a vegan or not. Could be he did. He was a man of great intellectual integrity, in my opinion. But maybe his wife of, 70 years, maybe she won the argument. Wives usually do win the argument, in my experience. So maybe they didn't change their diets. But you know what I do know? It's not too late for anyone in this room. Every one of you can change your diet. Every one of you can improve your health if you eat whole, real food, plant foods. I know this for a fact in my own life. I weigh the same as I weigh today as when I was 18 years old. My cholesterol is 135. My blood pressure is 105/75. I almost never get sick. I'm extremely healthy. At Whole Foods Market, we've put over 5,000 of our sickest team members through what we call a total health immersion. I've seen type 2 diabetes cured in less than 30 days for hundreds of people. I've seen heart disease reversed. I've seen people crying when they see me when I tour our stores because they say, you saved my life. Thank you, thank you, thank you. These diets work. It results in better health for you. It results in better health for the animals. It results in, as Bruce pointed out, it helps poverty, it helps the environment, it helps the animals, and it helps us. You can make a choice. You can be conscious. And once you know this stuff, you can't go back to sleep again. That's why I'm up here doing this talk, that's why we're doing this debate, because I know it can make a big difference. So, thank you very much for having me tonight.